Okay. No. Okay. Good evening. Let's try that again. Welcome to this meeting of the Mills River Planning Board, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. And at this time, ask everyone to join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And you all should have an agenda in front of you tonight. Are there any adjustments or additions to that agenda? I see there are none, so the agenda will stand. You should have received an electronic copy of our minutes from March the 1st and had an opportunity to read over those. If there are corrections, we'll need to note those. If not, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Motion we approve.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Foster. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Ms. Janowski. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Do we have any electronic public comment? I see there's no one in the room besides us.
Nothing's been received.
Okay, no public comment. And we have no old business, so we are trucking right along tonight. So our new business for this evening, as you all have received via email, is the text 21-04, which is the watershed text amendment. And I know Michael is going to give us a little bit of background. We've talked about it somewhat, but this is the first viewing that we've had of the text. I hope you guys took time to read through it really well so that we can ask any pertinent questions pretty quickly and process this thing on through. So Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So yeah, the last time this came before the planning board was, I think, just a background presentation in last August. I'll do a quick summary of the staff report. And since we do have a couple of new board members here and for the public's benefit, I'm going to run through a quick PowerPoint, just going over the background of watershed administration in the town. So again, a little background. After incorporating in 2003, Mills River had an interlocal agreement with Henderson County to enforce water supply watershed protection regulations, primarily because we have the city of Hendersonville drinking water intake on the Mills River, and then the Asheville water intake at the confluence of the Mills River and the French Broad River. It's state of North Carolina law that if you have a drinking water intake in your jurisdiction, you must apply state watershed standards, which have development restrictions to property within specific watershed areas. So just before I was hired, in April of last year, we found out that the interlocal agreement had expired a while back with Henderson County, and basically they were not going to provide those services for us any longer. So in talking with the state, they informed us we had to draft new regulations as pertaining to the town as soon as possible. That got delayed a little bit over the last 6 months, but really we want to have these adopted by the end of the fiscal year, so June 30. Again, it's a state requirement that we have these in place. We've been conducting watershed reviews based on the Henderson County ordinance. And again, the state said we have the authority to do that, but it's a lot tighter if we have the ordinance on our books. The language and the draft ordinance in your packet is based off the state model ordinance and then again the Henderson County standards. We're not proposing to change any of the regulations. We just have to incorporate everything into our code in order to enforce these regulations going forward. So with that, I'll actually switch to a quick little PowerPoint presentation I'm going to run through. It's going to provide a little more background and clarity. All right. So just an overview, well, I'll go over the background really briefly again, and then touch on the density requirements, which is primary purpose of the regulations, density restrictions, exclusions to the regulations, variances, and how they're going to be implemented in the town. So again, this is a state of North Carolina requirement. The Environmental Management Commission with the state reviews the regulations. They're actually reviewing the new model ordinance for the state that we based a lot of this language off of. But again, it's a state requirement for localities to enforce. The minimum requirements are defined in the state statutes, the state administrative code, and they cover lot size restrictions, lot coverage, so how much built upon area or new impervious surfaces on a lot, density, and then riparian buffers, so stream buffers, pond buffers, etc. So again, the state provides the oversight. They provide the watershed maps. We're not drawing new maps. We're not planning to change the boundaries. We're basically taking what the county's already done and putting it in our code. They have a classification system for the different types of watersheds. Each one has its own specific set of regulations. And then the specific management practices the town's going to have to implement going forward as part of staff's responsibility to basically keep these approved developments and watersheds compliant with the regulations. So what will we have to do? We have to adopt an ordinance, which we're in the process of now, appoint a watershed administrator, yours truly probably, appoint a watershed review board that will hear appeals and variances, which we're proposing to be the Board of Adjustment since they already go through those procedures for quasi-judicial proceedings. And then again, continued compliance that's going to be managed by staff. So just as an example, the Lowe's warehouse that was approved had a stormwater basin. That's required under state watershed law that it has to be inspected and maintained annually. A report has to be delivered to the town. There have to be easements dedicated to the town for me to go out and confirm basically the state of the stormwater device. And then enforcement for properties that do not comply with that and have devices that are not functioning appropriately. So these are the areas, these are not all watershed areas across the state, but these are the specific ones that fall within our jurisdiction. Watershed 2 critical area, which is the area just upstream of the Hendersonville water intake for the most restrictive, and then going down to the least restrictive. Watershed 2 balance of the watershed, or the regular area, if you want to call it. Then we have watershed 3 balance of watershed, and then watershed 4 protected area. Again, the top being the most restrictive, the bottom being the least restrictive. And then outside of watersheds, basically every area in the town has some type of stormwater requirement that can be triggered by developments of a certain size. So just to summarize, in the middle section of the town, and I'll have a map that shows this, sorry, in the middle third of town, we have the watersheds, maybe middle half. And then on the top quarter or third and bottom third, we have these state reviewed areas. So if there's a development that disturbs more than an acre of land, which is also the tripping measure for when you have to apply for sediment and erosion control plans, you also have to submit a stormwater plan to the state or something saying that you are excluded from those regulations or exempt. So again, just to touch on this, basically everywhere in the town has some type of stormwater oversight and watershed oversight. We touched on this. Critical area is the area basically half a mile upstream and up the drainage basin from the water intake. It's called a critical area and it's the most regulated because additional stormwater runoff from development, spills, could be transmitted to drinking water very quickly, whereas a lot of the other areas are further away and that's not the case. So these are the current designations. Move a little box here. So I guess, yeah, middle half of the town is all in these watershed areas. Here are the areas reviewed by the state that the northern and southern ends of our jurisdiction. If we imagine the Hendersonville water intake about here, this is that half-mile semicircle upstream from the intake. Again, where water drains to it, that's the most restrictive. And then up that, further west of that, again, in the Mills River watershed, we have the next most restrictive, the watershed 2 balance area. And again, those are the two that cover water that flows to the Hendersonville intake. The Asheville drinking water intake is actually over here outside of our jurisdiction. But again, because of state law and because of distance requirements, those watershed areas are these ones that are applicable to the Asheville water intake, the WS3 balance area, and then the one that covers the bulk of our jurisdiction, the WS4 protected area. So what are the regulations? So for single family, we can use density, lot size, or lot coverage to regulate development. And this applies to subdivision regulations as well, which is why there's a subdivision ordinance text amendment included as part of this as well. So in the critical area, the minimum lot size is 80,000 square feet for single family. So even as of today, if someone has a 2-acre property, you cannot subdivide that below this threshold. Similarly, for the number of dwelling units per acre, if you want to add a house to an existing lot, it can exceed these requirements. And then there's also the the percentage of impervious surface coverage. So structures with roofs that create stormwater runoff, gravel and paved driveways, etc. And then non-residential, so commercial, industrial projects. Again, because it's not really on a lot size basis, we just use the impervious surface coverage percentage numbers to regulate development. So again, this is the maximum you can go in one of these watershed areas to develop a specific property or cover it with that much new impervious surfaces and not have stormwater controls, which gets into the next part. You can actually go higher. So again, if we go back, 6, 12, 24, and 24 goes to 24, 30, 50, and 70 with stormwater controls. So that means a stormwater plan drawn up by a professional engineer, stormwater calculations that show you meet stormwater detention or holding new runoff back, and also suspended solids dropping out, which is just called stormwater treatment. An engineer has to design those, seal the plans, and then submit them to the town for review against our standards, which are again are the state standards. So if there's tracks that are partly in the watershed and out, or if there's commonly owned property that spans different watershed areas, we will allow for density averaging. So again, taking those percentages, the thresholds, and averaging them across the two parcels, which will come up with a new number for a development that may span the watershed boundaries. That is included in the draft regulations. Cluster development, something we already allow in the zoning code, basically higher density at one side of a parcel and lower density in another. That's allowed, again, as long as the overall parcel and the overall development density adheres to the regulations. What's not included? Existing development. We're not going around and saying your single family home has too much impervious surface area. Same for commercial. Any commercial redevelopment, BUA stands for built upon area. So again, impervious surface coverage. So if someone's redeveloping a property, but isn't adding more parking spaces, is not expanding the building, that does not have to comply and doesn't have to submit a watershed plan. Same with single family redevelopment. Agriculture is completely exempt. Like a lot of other town ordinances, the only requirement is vegetative setbacks from perennial streams. And then transportation projects. So we're not going to impose watershed regulations on DOT for widening 191. Variances are an option. just like with zoning and subdivision regulations, circumstances come up that could warrant someone varying from the watershed regulations. Just like with variances that the Board of Adjustment hears, you have to prove hardship. You have to prove that it's in the spirit and intent of the ordinance. And again, that it's still going to protect water quality. The main thing to note is that the Board of Adjustment, which we're proposing to be the Watershed Review Board, can only issue variances, minor variances, which is less than a 10% change in requirements for low density and 5% for high density. So I won't go all the way back to the table, but for the most least restrictive watershed areas that with engineered stormwater controls allows you to develop 70% of the property, they could only grant a minor variance up to 75%. It's only a 5% difference for high density. If they're not using stormwater controls, it's a low density project, they could do a 10% variance. Anything out that has to be reviewed by the state. So what are we doing to get this in place? Just like with the county, we're planning to have the high density options. It's just too restrictive, only allowing most of the property in Mills River to develop to 12 to 24% of the land area is very restrictive. So we want to allow development at the higher density, but again, with engineered stormwater controls to control that additional stormwater runoff. We're creating a watershed protection overlay district in the zoning regulations, which again is one of the items in your packet. That basically will identify the watershed areas similar to like the corridor overlay district. And then the actual regulating chapter, the chapter 156, will again point to those districts with the regulations. And then I said we're going to update the subdivision ordinance to include some of those minimum lot size requirements. I touched on this already. We used the state model watershed ordinance and the Henderson County ordinance, and then looked at our own regulations to draft what's before you tonight. I can take any questions. I can go through some of the other maps in your packet too, if you'd like.
One of the things that struck me is that you referred to watershed. Does that mean that the creeks, streams, rivers that flow through town are not subject, to what we have to deal with here?
Well, so streams and creeks specifically, the town zoning regulations and in the subdivision code, we have a 30-foot vegetative buffer requirement. So you can't build a structure within 30 feet of a perennial stream, a pond, river, etc. But for the regulations we covered that cover density, lot size, and everything else, that's just within the watershed regulations, and it really just depends on if the property is located in a watershed district, we'll call it, per that map.
I guess what I'm wondering is that, so there's no responsibility for the quality of the water in the Mills River, for example.
Like, so testing of stream and river water.
Correct.
And
runoff from farms and that sort of.
Not regularly. I believe the portions of the Mills River and the French Broad are designated Class B waters, which I, again, believe means they're recreational waters. So there is testing done. I can't remember if it's by the state, but I know a nonprofit does it as well, to basically determine if they're safe for recreation, if they're safe for people to enter the water. That's not something the town is involved with.
So based on your comments, this is not going to be a new position to be hired by the town. Because this seems like a lot of work to me, for someone like yourself to assume in addition to your other duties. And I'm not sure, at least in my perspective, and I don't know that council or anyone else will agree with me, but I think the regulation, this ordinance, the regulation and the enforcement and all those things is very important. You know, maintaining the security of our watershed and the commodity of water intake is pretty important. And that just seems a lot to add to someone's plate who already has a full-time position.
I don't want to get into budget discussions and requests for positions, but this.
Well, and I
question-
certainly am not asking you
fine.
to do that, but
This question did come up at the last council meeting where we gave the background presentation again, because there's a lot of new members on council that we haven't discussed this with before. And that question was raised, and I did estimate this will probably consume 15 to 20% of my time. It's a lot, yes. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. But again, it's a state requirement that
I mean,
There's
we
no
we
way
have to
around
do it. I know that. I just, would hope that the powers that be would give it its due respect of this position and make sure that it's done well. And if it falls on your plate, I'm sure you will do the very best job that you can. But we're all human and there's only so many hours in a day to do.
I'll just say additional support would be needed in the planning department to implement this on top of everything else. I'll just leave it at that.
Now, in terms of enforcement, you mentioned that if a property were found to be out of compliance or whatever in the enforcement stage, do you know what is typical for, are there penalties when someone is out of compliance or when they don't? If there's an issue.
So enforcement would really be centered around stormwater control measures.
Right.
So again, now if someone has subdivided a property illegally without town approval and violates the watershed standards in that process, there's even provisions in the subdivision code now about recording a plat without town approval. But again, we're not out to fine anyone. I mean, I would just want it to be re-recorded and corrected. But the enforcement provisions in the draft ordinance in front of you tonight are specifically about stormwater control measures.
Right.
So stormwater ponds, whether they're open, stormwater detention devices that are buried underground, and the annual inspection and maintenance of those devices. So if someone's applying for a high density development, which again allows you to develop the most amount of the property as you can with those stormwater controls, we have to guarantee those are working, or else the high density development, I don't want to say is polluting the watershed, but is adding more stormwater runoff in an uncontrolled manner that would be out of alignment with the regulations. So that's where, as watershed administrator or the designee, we would go out, inspect those devices. Usually the applicant or the property owner actually hires a professional to inspect them, and then staff goes out to confirm the same. And there's a whole set of standards for different stormwater devices about maintenance, about the inspections, about operation procedures, how often they're cleaned out. Because again, sediment is supposed to build up and be captured in some of those devices. So again, enforcement is more around making sure those are functioning correctly and not about penalizing a property owner because there's a house.
Right, and I read in the text amendment, all the information that you gave about that. So I just wondered if you found someone that, for example, if they hadn't turned in the appropriate paperwork, you simply go and remind them, hey, we need this turned in by, such and such time. You failed to do that. I guess that was just my question.
Yeah, with any enforcement, my mantra is always, educate to gain compliance. And then if someone, is just ignoring the regulations, that's when fines would come into play. I don't know what I'd have to look through to see what the actual fine amounts would be. But I don't think it would be beyond anything we currently have.
Does this require someone with a background, for example, in hydrology or something similar?
So for the high density developments where there's an engineer designing the stormwater control system, again, pond, underground detention devices, we have already contracted with a third party engineer that's conducting those reviews for us. Because the answer is no, I don't have a hydrology degree. And yeah, 70 pages of stormwater calculations is beyond me. So ever since we found out this had fallen to the town manager and I worked together to basically find an engineer who would be able to conduct those reviews. Now, the normal day-to-day reviews of lot size, percent coverage does fall to me. The simple stuff.
I agree with what Sherry said before. But we really don't have a choice, right? We got to, excuse me, we have to assume this, Town of Mills River does. It's going to be a lot more work for your department. So again, I guess we don't have a choice, but I have a question. Retention ponds. Is there any requirement, people who have retention, I know various businesses and all have retention ponds. Is there any requirement to maintain that retention pond in any standard?
There is, and I would say it depends on how and when they were permitted. But again, if they've received a watershed permit, so again, from April of last year going forward, the town, has been issuing those approvals. But before that, because of the interlocal agreement with the county was still in place, Henderson County was issuing all those approvals. But we're still using the same state standards, and the state and the administrative code and in their stormwater manuals has very detailed explanations about what is needed for annual maintenance. And again, that's another document beside, I mentioned the easement before about, that's something the town will need to get from new development that has these measures so we can go in and inspect. One of the other items is an operation and maintenance agreement that is signed between the town and the property owner. And that's, again, a legal agreement that they're agreeing to maintain those devices per our standard. I don't know, it's different for every type of device and every type of development, so I don't know what they would be specifically, but they do exist, those types of standards.
Because I've noticed, most new construction you see nowadays, Walmart or whatever, they wind up with a retention pond, but I've seen some over the years that look pretty bad. So I was wondering if there is any standard, but yeah, so if you find one of these that's not being maintained properly, you can take some action.
It is common, at least where I worked before, which was also in a very highly regulated watershed, it was common. This property, again, it's education. A lot of property owners just aren't aware this even exists. So there are instances where a commercial development's gone in, there's a small pond, and then 3 years later, again, without checking on it annually, there's trees growing in it. That's considered a non-functioning system. And that's why having staff and requiring annual inspections is part of the requirement and part of what the state requires. Because again, if you're permitted to go above and beyond those minimum or low density percent coverage thresholds, that property owner or developer needs to ensure that the high density of development, the stormwater runoff from that is being controlled and treated. And the only way to do that is to ensure those systems are functioning through the enforcement processes and through the other things staff will have to do.
Is there any legal jeopardy in this interim period from the time that the county gave up their responsibility and the time that we are now assuming that responsibility?
There's not. I've been in communication with the head of the state watershed program, and he's aware. We've been working through the ordinance there's been some delays, we have new council members, so we need to bring them up to speed. Anyway, no, he's basically said, as long as we can prove we're making progress to adopting these regulations, that we have the authority to enforce them. Now, if that drags out past a year, which is why, again, we're trying to push this through now. You don't want to show that you're dragging your feet. The state wants to know that ordinances are in place and that the regulations are being implemented. But again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been assured by the state coordinator of the program that we're in good standing, but we do need to push this forward now. And again, that's not to say this board has to take any action tonight. If you have additional questions or if you want additional information, it's fine to table this. But again, I wanted to introduce this tonight to at least show the state that we're taking meaningful steps now to get this done. And our goal is to have it adopted by the end of the fiscal year.
I had one final question. You talked about, you said we will allow high density, referencing the shift from percentage of built upon area to a higher percentage with an appropriate stormwater management plan, I suppose. What allowed densities are we currently operating with? Are we currently operating with the same? And when Henderson County was doing this for us, was it still allowing those higher densities as well?
They were. So yeah, Henderson County did permit high density developments, again, with these same state thresholds.
Just wanted to make sure we weren't shifting to something new that we weren't currently doing.
Mike, you said that this was modeled on the state and the county's ordinances or regulations. Is there anything in here that we should particularly direct our attention to, that we would have some leeway on? It's a lot of stuff here, and if it's pretty much just we do what the state does, or is there some area that you would say this board needs to specifically look at?
To answer your first question, we can modify it if we want our watersheds so we can modify it in one direction. If we want to be more strict than the state, we can. We can't be less restrictive than the state because those are the bare minimum requirements. As to which part of the ordinance, to maybe pay particular attention to, I don't really have an answer to that. I mean, stream buffers or something that different towns have different numerical requirements for. Again, like I said, for the subdivision plats, we have a 30-foot buffer where no structures can be built next to a perennial stream. I don't have specific examples, but some towns and cities, that's a higher amount. But the state standard is that if you're doing a low density development, it's a 30-foot buffer. If it's a high density development, it actually increases to 100 feet. Because again, it's more concentrated development, more stormwater runoff. But that's something I've seen varied in the regulations by other towns. The town could propose to even modify the watershed district boundaries. I don't know if that's something I'd recommend at this point in time, because again, we're just trying to get something adopted. But no, there is leeway. And again, there were a couple options in the presentation that, if we do not want to allow high density development, we don't have to. But as to a specific section, yeah, I don't have any guidance there, sorry.
Since we have a lot of agricultural areas in the town, has there been any thought given to consulting with farmers?
When
Not
we were
suggesting we necessarily want their point of view, but as a courtesy, at least to their.
Well, they are exempt. So these regulations would not apply to them. Again, for the built upon area, the density thresholds, the lot sizes, the only thing they have to abide by is setbacks from streams. But when we were doing the background presentations, again in August or late summer, early fall of last year, the town manager and I did give a presentation to the Agricultural Advisory Board for the town. That was the last time we spoke about it, but at least those members of the ag community were notified and should be aware about it.
Another question. So, our exposure to this when it was under Henderson County was as a plan would come to us for approval or recommendation of approval. If I recall, pretty much what we hear is it's been reviewed and it meets all the requirements. Is there anything in your experience, because I don't have any experience other than that, I guess I want to make sure that whatever's working well in our old system is in here, and whatever, if there's anything that, every time it came across your desk, you said, Jiminy Christmas, I wish that was different, Is there anything like that we should be looking at?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. Mainly what the county did previously in the interaction with the town, going back to subdivision plats, when any property was subdivided in the town, the county watershed administrator would basically sign off on the plat. So we would have the town subdivision administrator ensuring it meets our subdivision and zoning code, and then the county watershed administrator ensuring that that subdivision of land met those lot size requirements. So that was one review the county did before. Again, that's something the town will be taking over. Basically, there will just be two signature lines for the town, one for the subdivision, one for the watershed. I don't see that changing. In terms of the development reviews, most of it's administrative work. So, I mean, once this is adopted, there's still going to be quite a bit of administrative work, developing applications, we're still working on the SmartGov online permitting system, but making sure this is incorporated into that. That's something else I've been working on. But yeah, nothing comes to mind specifically at this time. Mhm.
Is there anything else any pressing issue that someone sees that you'd like to ask?
Well, like I said before, I don't see any problem with the way we've done it before. The only problem is more work for you. And I just think we need to get this done as soon as possible so you can go on to some other things, because bottom line is we're gonna have to do it. And so my idea is let's do it.
And I'll just say again, I appreciate that comment, but I don't want to rush this board. The idea was just to get this introduced tonight, to again, show progress to the state. Even if this board does recommend approval and does the planning consistency statement tonight, it'll probably be a month before this is brought to council. But again, with the goal of having it adopted before the end of the fiscal year.
Would we have a watershed manager within the
Yeah,
township?
the title would be watershed administrator. It's not spelled out in the code, but it would most likely be me, because I also serve as, although my official title is zoning administrator, I also serve as the town subdivision administrator. So any subdivision plats that come before me, I have to review and approve. And that would be the same for any watershed permits and reviews.
Anything else?
I'll just ask one question specifically. Were there any questions about the map or the districts or boundaries or anything like that?
Yeah, they've not changed. Yep. All right. Well, I do think that is going to be beneficial to move forward with this at a, I'm like, Mike, I don't want to take any questions away, but I feel like everyone has asked the questions. We've had opportunity to look through this. Obviously, we're not watershed experts ourselves either. But I think we've asked pertinent questions, and I think in order to get this moving on to council and give them time to look through it, and if they have any questions and want to rework anything, to give them time to meet this proposed June 30th deadline. I mean, I feel confident enough to move forward with a vote tonight. Is there anyone who does not feel comfortable to do that? Okay, then, shall we make a motion? We have a statement of consistency there. Remember that what we're doing, this is a text amendment. So what we do is we can recommend approval of that, or we can table it if we so wish. We can deny approval.
I would make a motion that we approve it.
So Mr. Foster has made a motion that we approve text amendment 21-04.
I'll second it.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that vote is a 6-0 vote. I would also add to that motion, or make a motion, that this text amendment also is consistent with objective 3.3 of the Making Mills River Comprehensive Plan. Do we have to put that in a motion?
Yeah, it can either be done as one combined motion or two separate. So, and you should also just add that you adopt the draft statement of consistency.
So I would simply make the motion that we do adopt the statement of consistency, that text amendment 21-04 is consistent with objective 3.3 of the comprehensive plan.
I'll second.
And we have another second. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, so that was unanimous as well. All right. Orly, is that all you needed on that? Awesome. Okay, so that brings us to any additional items. Are there any updates from council that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone was watching, but at the March 24th meeting, the special use permit, major special use permit for the townhome development on Jeffress Road was approved. That was the continuation of the earlier hearing. That was the one item that has come before this board that went before council where a decision was rendered. Staff is still working on the TIA text amendment, but again, we wanted to bring this forward first, and the subdivision rec area text amendment. There may be another text amendment coming forward in the future, looking at our quasi judicial proceedings, specifically in regards to special use permits. Since we went through the process with the townhomes, some items in the code were brought to light that may need to change. So I don't know when that will be coming. There's been no formal direction from council, but that's something that may come forward in the future. But that's all I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Unless there's other questions for me.
Does anyone have questions? All right, well, it is that time of the evening, so I would hear a motion if anyone has one. You have a motion to adjourn. Do I get a second? Have a second by Mr. Foster. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that ends our meeting. Y'all have a good evening.